Animal welfare. All I can say is that every time a big truck drives by with pigs inside of it, I do cry, and they look very sad.
Can you tell me what the Farm Bill is?
Nope. Farm Bill? Yeah, nope.
Animal welfare? Well, I assume that's when an animal family is below the poverty line and receives additional support from the government. So the Farm Bill is the man who has worked on the farm for 80 years.
Tell me, what do you know about Proposition 12 in California?
Oh, nothing.
I know nothing about that. I'm so sorry.
Animal welfare, like how they take care of the animals.
You know, agricultural and food things.
I don't know what the Farm Bill is.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the CAT Podcast. My name is Sydney Schnorr and our topic for discussion today is cured and uncured meats. Ashtyn and Lindsey will be leading us through the conversation today with their wonderful guests. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to them.
Hi there, everyone. I am Lindsey Hospodarsky.
And I'm Ashtyn Jolly.
And we are so excited for today's Meatheads episode. If you're new here, the Meatheads episode is a branch of the Contemporary Egg Issues podcast, or CAP, hosted by Iowa State University's agricultural communication students. We loved being able to dive into today's topic to help shed some light on this important topic impacting so many stakeholders across the country and the world.
Like we mentioned, we are agricultural communication students here at Iowa State University. Both Lindsey and I grew up within agriculture and were drawn to Iowa State to help learn how to bridge the gap between farms and consumers. I also have an animal science double major, so I'm especially interested in this topic. I'm planning on going to grad school for meat science, so I'm interested in how I can learn more in my future studies.
This episode matters because the way meat is labeled affects consumers' trust, food safety, and even how farmers and processors are viewed. So today, we're breaking it all down. The history of curing, the science behind nitrite, what cured legally means, and why this label has become such a hot topic by talking with experts who study this every day. We hope this episode of Meatheads can help by giving you a clearer picture of what's going on behind the label and why it matters to all of us, as students, as communicators, and as people who care about agriculture. Thanks for listening to the Contemporary Egg Issues podcast. So before we get to our special guest, let's dive a little deeper into today's topic, uncured meats. At first idea, the term uncured seems pretty straightforward, but it's actually way more complicated. What we really want to talk about is alternatively cured meats, which means the meat is still cured, just not with traditional synthetic curing ingredients.
According to the USDA and the Code of Federal Regulations, uncured refers to meat products that do not contain any added synthetic nitrates or nitrites, such as sodium nitrite or sodium nitrate. However, many of these products still use natural sources of nitrates like celery powder or even beet powder. These natural nitrates convert into the same active curing compounds once they're in the meat, which makes the term uncured somewhat misleading.
Now, cured meat has been around for a long time and used for thousands of years, long before refrigeration, as one of the earliest methods to keep meat both safe and edible. Ancient civilizations relied on salt, smoke, and later nitrite-rich salt to slow spoilage and to extend the shelf life of their meat. Today, we understand the science behind it much more clearly. Nitrite is responsible for stabilizing the meat's pink color, developing the characteristic cured flavor, and most importantly, inhibiting dangerous bacteria like Clostridium botulinum, which causes botulism. So curing isn't just a modern food trend that people should avoid. It actually has real use and implications to people's diet.
Lindsey and I's interest in this topic originally came out through our experience in Dr. Tarte's Animal Science 4600 class, which taught us about processed meats. Since cured meats are processed meats, we spent a good portion of that semester diving into alternative curing and the effects of nitrite. I think it'll be fun to learn more about nitrites and curing from Dr. Tarte later on in this podcast.
Yes, for sure. That class really sparked our interest. After learning about nitrite and all the roles that it played in meat products, I thought it was interesting that people wouldn't even want it in their food. After learning about alternatively cured meats as well, I dove more into the labeling and marketing of the claims. I know that right now in my fridge at home, my mom has some uncured pepperoni from Sam's Club. She's always looking to find easier ways to be healthy, especially with their diets, so I know it's a real thing happening in the market.
This makes the topic both timely and controversial. As more consumers look for clean or natural labels, there's growing pressure on food companies to remove synthetic additives, even when those additives serve important safety functions. This has led to a rise in alternatively cured products that appear healthier on the label, but act pretty much the same as traditionally cured meats once they're processed. The gap between what the science shows, what the labels suggest, and what consumers believe is why this conversation is important and why we're taking a closer look at it in today's episode of Meatheads.
Thank you for joining us, Dr. Tarte. I know you have, just from being in your classes and all of our experience working with you in the past, I know you know a lot about this topic, and it's something you are really passionate about, which is awesome. Before we really dive into more of the meat of the matter, I'm going to ask you to just give a quick introduction about yourself, talk about your experience of the meat industry and how you kind of got into processed meats. Whenever you're ready.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to speak with you guys about this topic. I'm an associate professor in the animal science department here at Iowa State, and my specialty is meat science, and within meat science, processed and value-added meats. So the work that I do encompasses not just the meat, but ingredients that go into those meat products, as well as processes involved in converting basically a raw agricultural commodity like meat or poultry into a value-added finished product such as a sausage, ham, bacon, and such. I've been in the meat industry for nearly 30 years since graduate school. I worked 19 years in the industry for about 4 companies, including internationally for about 3 years. All that time was in research and development. And I came to Iowa State in 2015, and I've been here since.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for giving us a quick intro about yourself. Now we're going to go ahead and jump into what these people are dying to know about. Our first question is, and you kind of already touched on this, but how did you become interested in nitrites and the curing process?
Well, you can, when you work in value-added and processed meat products, you cannot not touch on nitrite, because
Of course.
nitrite is a very, very important additive in a lot of these products. And so, and again, I'm sure this will come up in the conversation later on, but as new technologies come on board and consumer perceptions change and evolve, we need to continue to be looking at ingredients such as nitrite and their functionality, what they do in the meat, and understand their chemistry a little better, right? The better we understand, you can't really manipulate, so to speak, something that you don't fully understand. You have to be able to understand it, measure it, and then go from there. So yeah, nitrates are fundamental to these products. We call the products that contain nitrite, we call them cured products, okay, in the meat industry.
Awesome. You kind of touched on it a little bit about how it's kind of a mysterious additive. Consumers might not know exactly what role nitrites play, whether it's coming from a traditional source or a alternative source. But what role do those nitrites really play in the meat preservation and safety? Like, why is it important to have it in a processed meat?
Well, nitrite is a fundamentally important ingredient in many products. Normally we talk about 4 things that nitrite does. So nitrite, remember I said these products are called cured products, right? So nitrite gives our products what we call the typical cured color, which is, for example, it's what helps make ham pink or bacon pink, hot dogs, and so forth. If we didn't have nitrite, the products would look gray. Imagine uh, cooking a pork loin, right, without nitrite in your home oven, it comes out looking kind of gray, right, like cooked meat. The moment you add nitrite, then that product will take on a pink appearance. It will look very different. It will also taste different. So the second thing is flavor. So nitrite contributes what we call the cured flavor. So again, it's the difference between imagine a roasted pork loin and a pork loin made with nitrite, which we call Canadian bacon. That's where Canadian bacon comes from. So the only difference being nitrite, the Canadian bacon, everybody's familiar with Canadian bacon. It's kind of like ham, right? So it looks and tastes like ham. That is strictly just due to nitrite. So the flavor changes as well. So compare those two things. Just by adding nitrite, you have a completely different product. Nitrite also helps us control certain microorganisms in meat products, which is advantageous, as it'll help give value-added meat products a much longer shelf life than their fresh meat counterparts. It'll help us control a bacterium called Clostridium botulinum. It'll help keep those spores of Clostridium botulinum from germinating and producing a toxin in the process that can be fatal to humans. And it'll also help control other pathogens such as Listeria monocytogenes, which is the pathogenic microorganism of most interest when we talk about processed meat products. And so it'll help keep that in check as well. The fourth thing that nitrite will do for us is it acts as what we call an antioxidant. It will keep the meat from oxidizing. Just to give you an idea, let's go back to the idea of that oven roasted pork loin, right? So you cook your pork loin, it's delicious. You have leftovers, you put the leftovers in the refrigerator, you come back the day after and say, I'm gonna have those leftovers of that delicious pork loin from yesterday. You take that out, you reheat them. Doesn't matter how you reheat them, in the oven or in the microwave oven, and it doesn't taste the same, right? The reason it doesn't taste the same is because the fats, the lipids in that meat have begun to oxidize. And when you cook the meat, that helps accelerate the rate of the oxidation reaction. So when you add nitrites, now let's go back to that Canadian bacon analogy. When you have nitrite, you can save the leftovers, Canadian bacon, or think ham. You can come back the next day or the next week, and the product will still taste the same, right? Because the nitrite in that product has prevented those lipids, those fats that are in the meat from oxidizing. These are some of the things that nitrite does. If we don't use nitrite, many of these products cannot be made. So we wouldn't have hot dogs. We wouldn't have many different types of sausages. We would not have ham. We would not have bacon as we know it. It is quite important in the meat industry.
Thank you so much for sharing. I know you just talked a great deal about nitrite and its role in cured meats, but now I kind of want to ask you, what makes an uncured product uncured? I know when Lindsey and I were looking and kind of what we've learned from you, there's still some ingredients that are used in there that are technically making it cured, but it's not nitrite. So can you kind of explain how uncured meat is able to be called uncured and just kind of some of the processes associated with uncured meat?
Yeah, sure. By definition, uncured refers to a product that has no nitrite, right? Because when we add nitrite, we call that curing. So any product that doesn't have nitrite is an uncured product. However, we also have to look at the regulatory framework and what the regulations actually say. In the regulations, curing is defined as the addition of nitrite. So you have to actually add chemical nitrite. So buy nitrite and add it to your product, or nitrate, which is a more oxidized form of nitrite. You can add that too. If you do not add nitrite to a product that normally would contain nitrite, the product must be labeled uncured. So this is why you see some, say, uncured hams and uncured hot dogs in the marketplace, but you don't see an uncured turkey breast or something like that, because the key there is that it must be a product to which nitrite would normally be added. And when you withhold nitrite, then that product must be called uncured. Okay. And this of course, has become an important topic in recent years because of the advent of what we call natural or alternative curing technologies, where it is where we companies will seek out natural sources, ingredients that have naturally occurring nitrite, because nitrite and nitrate, especially nitrate, occurs in nature a lot. So we add that product into the meat product because we are not adding nitrite directly, but the nitrite is a component of that ingredient. We do not have to add nitrite to our label. So therefore, consumers will not see that there's nitrite in the product because the label doesn't say so. You're not required to, right? When you're adding ingredients, you're not required to list out the hundreds or thousands of chemical compounds present in that ingredient. But however, because remember back to that regulation that says that if you have a product that normally would contain nitrite, to which nitrite is not added, now you must label it uncured. So when we add these ingredients that contain natural nitrite and nitrates to these products, the USDA does not consider that as the addition of nitrite. So therefore, these products must be called uncured by law. So that's the explanation of why you see those products out there. Now, the other question is, are these products really uncured? And the answer is no, these products are cured. For a meat scientist like me, cured means it contains nitrite, and I honestly don't care where the nitrite comes from because the nitrite is going to do what it does, whether you added it as a nitrite powder or whether it came in a natural source. The most popular one is celery powder, dried celery. But again, the USDA requires manufacturers to use the term uncured to refer to these products.
Yeah. So you kind of talked about how uncured products truly aren't uncured. Do you think if consumers understood what was actually in their products and kind of the science behind it, do you think opinions would change over the word cured versus uncured? I know nitrate is a big buzzword for a lot of different consumers. So
I think every time we give consumers more information, it would be better. It would change their perspectives. It would give them a more education upon which to base their decisions. And so, however, it's not, when you talk about curing, we're talking kind of about chemistry. And so that's kind of a tall order, right? To expect that consumers are going to understand the chemistry of the food products. But yes, I would say if you give more information, most consumers should be able to better understand it. But implicit in your question is, okay, so what is this? Do consumers even know what cured means in the context of meat products, right? So what is cured, right? We usually think of curing as something that happens if when you're sick, you get cured of some disease, right? I think a lot of the confusion arises when consumers didn't even know what cure was to begin with, because that term only came in vogue when the USDA started requiring these companies to use the term uncured. So okay, so this is uncured. So what does cured mean to begin with, right? And so I don't think a lot of consumers probably understand. Savvy consumers do. I met consumers who do. So in these uncured products, remember, you must have the name uncured next to the product name, but then this is finer print that has to be also on that front panel. We call that the principal display panel of a food label. So where it has to say no nitrates or nitrites added except for. So I think that statement probably, and by the way, this is my opinion, but I think that statement probably resonates with consumers more because now it's calling out the names of the ingredients, no nitrates and nitrites added. And so ingredients might go, oh, so there's no nitrates or nitrates. And then they might turn over the label and read the ingredients statement and so, oh, indeed, there's no nitrite in this product, right? And then, of course, the other half of that is except for no nitrates or nitrates added, except for those naturally occurring in whatever it is you added that contain the nitrite. I think it's personally, I feel it has been a little confusing for consumers as well. But I think savvy consumers who can read between the lines could probably read that and see a bit of a, in my opinion, a bit of a contradiction, right? So you tell me it's uncured. If I understood that curing means additional nitrite, I doubt most consumers understand that. But then you're telling me no nitrites or nitrates except for those that are, so does he have nitrites or not? Right? So the label is telling you that it does contain nitrates or nitrite, except not added nitrate or nitrite, chemical nitrate or nitrite, but nitrate or nitrite coming from a different source.
I just have one last little quick question before we wrap up. We've had a lot of really good discussion about the current state of nitrites and uncured and cured meats. Where do you think like the next step will be to maybe helping clear it up for consumers? If you think it needs cleared up or more information given to them, what do you think that next step should be?
Well, there's actually a petition that was submitted to the USDA about, I think it was approximately 5 years ago or so, that asked for clarification on the term cured and uncured, and asked that the term uncured not be used in products that contain nitrite or nitrate in any form. And this petition also asked for a few other things. To that petition, the USDA replied, again, 5 years ago, and they stated that they would come up with a rule, right? And in this rule, they would define what a curing agent actually is, and they would try to clarify some of this confusion that there is. However, nothing has happened in 5 years. Okay, so we've gone through an entire presidential administration where nothing at all happened with this. But this is still sitting out there because there's a letter by the FSIS stating that they would actually write a rule about this. So I have no idea how long it's going to take. 4 years ago, we thought it was kind of imminent. Now I don't really know. That's kind of an attempt to try to clarify for consumers that the use, especially the use of the term curing, in my personal opinion, the use of the term uncured is misleading to consumers. But remember, it's the law. Okay, so remember that when companies use that term, they're complying with the law. They have no choice. Okay, but the term still is misleading to consumers because it's not, because it does contain nitrite. So what the agency or the FSIS said they would do is they would redefine the meaning of curing, right? So curing is not strictly referred to addition of the chemical form of nitrite in its pure chemical form, like it is added in the industry today. That was a good step, I think, to clarify things. But at this point, I don't know what else you can do except just make sure that the labels are are truthful. And unfortunately, I don't think it is at the moment. But the law is the law, and that's what we got right now. So from an industry, from a company perspective, I don't know. Companies can probably try to educate consumers. Educating consumers is very difficult. And so, especially on very, very sensitive topics, you need to do that very, very carefully. And so, companies could try to do that, but it's very important that the rules and the definitions in the rules change because those are the rules upon which fair competition is based on, right? So, if I'm a manufacturer of one of these products and I say, well, I'm going to explain to consumers why my uncured product really is not uncured, but I still have to call it uncured because I'm required to. When you try to go outside of the rules sometimes, or not outside of the rules as in violating the rules, but go beyond, I should say, beyond what the rule does, you may be placing yourself at a disadvantage compared to your competition because you may be creating an environment where, oh, you're telling me things I didn't know, but the competition is still. So the rules are really like the boundaries of the sandbox, and that's where companies are going to play. So that's why it's very important that the rules allow for labels that are truthful for consumers.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing kind of your expertise and those insights with us today. It looks like we're about out of time, but Lindsay and I just want to thank you once again for joining
Sure.
us. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us today. Once again, that was Dr. Tarte, kind of an expert in processed meats and nitrites and all things curings. Once again, thank you so much, Dr. Tarte.
You're very welcome. Take care.
Alrighty, well, our next guest on our episode is going to be Elias Perez. He's a current grad student at Iowa State in meat science. Welcome, Elias. We're so glad that you could join us today. To begin, would you like to give us just a quick introduction about yourself and kind of tell us a little bit about your experience in processed meats?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm Elias Perez. I'm in my last year of my master's at Iowa State University. I study animal science, but particularly meat science. I work in value-added processing when it comes to meat science. So I work in processed meats. My research is in nitrite chemistry. So I am working on ways to modulate meat products to lower residual nitrite concentration using synthetic nitrite.
Well, that seems like you are a great candidate to obviously be on our podcast, and we're very grateful that you could take time out of your day. I bet you have a pretty busy schedule, so we really appreciate your discussion. So our first question that we have for you today is, what are your thoughts about the impact on like the presence of uncured labels on consumers? So like if a product has uncured on it, how do you think that impacts consumers, and like good thing, bad thing?
Personally, I do believe that there is an impact when it comes to consumers and the labeling of uncured meat. I think that while chemically there is no difference in the meat, I do believe that there are benefits when it comes to buying uncured meats compared to traditionally cured meats, specifically in regards to process and truly the ingredients itself. The thing is, I think that it's kind of it is a double-edged sword because there are the people who are clean label. There are the people who really want to shift towards more natural, less processed, ultra processed, quote unquote granola moms, almond moms, things like that, where they want to have less chemicals in their food. And I really do think that there is a demand, and these processors and producers actually need to meet this demand, because when it comes to being ethical, I think that is up to one's interpretations on what is truly ethical or not. Mechanistically, are uncured products the same in the nitrite chemistry as traditionally cured products? Yes, it undergoes the same transformation from nitrate to nitrite to nitric oxide to dinitrogen trioxide and all these other nitric oxide compounds, but it is coming in a different way. It is coming in a different vehicle. Do I personally purchase uncured meats? No, I don't eat meat, but that is that is neither here nor there. But I do know that there are people willing to pay extras for these natural uncured labels because it makes them feel better. It makes them feel like they are doing stuff. And in a time where there's a lot of not good things and not great feelings going on right now, why yuck someone's yum when it comes to what they buy in the store? It's like, I don't judge people for what they eat. I think that if people want to buy it, they can buy it. And I think that if there is a current need and a demand for that market, it should continue to be sold.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. That's an interesting perspective that I don't think we've gotten to hear yet. And kind of following up on your response from the last question, say that there's a new change in the industry where all of these uncured products are going to be called cured, because like you recognized, technically, scientifically speaking, they are still going through a curing process. Say that all of these uncured products will have to eventually be called cured products. How do you think that's going to affect consumers? Is it going to be negative? Are you going to see a ton of pushback from people wanting to see more uncured labeling? Or how do you think that's going to look if uncured products become cured products or become labeled as cured products?
I think that there is going to be a lot of consumer pushback. I know that there are people, I personally see a lot of things on social media about like getting uncured meats and stuff. And also I've seen a lot of social media posts from influencers being like, I don't use synthetic nitrite. I'm against synthetic nitrite. I mean, XYZ. I do think that when regulations are changed, I know that there's been push for the last 30 years on getting different understandings and regulations and labels, both from industry and also consumers. I see both sides of the coin of wanting push and push back. I think that initially people will be against it. And if everything starts to having to be labeled as cured products 100%, even with the addition of natural nitrite, I do think it'll get better over time. People will kind of get used to it and people can kind of understand. Again, it comes with a lack of education from people. And that's not anyone's fault. We are in an ag field. We happen to have access to these kinds of information where we are able to learn actually some of the science and actual differences between these. However, most of the population does not have that knowledge and does not have access to those resources, which I think is something that we as a society, we as scientists, we as ag comm majors, people who are working to communicate with the public, linking science to an applicable and digestible way to give to the community and just everybody else. I think that we need to get better education out there because there isn't a lot right now. And the education and the information that is currently out is misinformation and not correct, coming from people who think they're saying the correct thing, but just on a scientific basis are not.
You just mentioned some really good points about how we can use education and more knowledge to help share the correct information and try to not have as much misinformation out there. So this kind of leads perfectly into our next question of if you could change one thing about how uncured meats are currently communicated, what would it be? Like what channel do you think it would be best to communicate that uncured are basically the same as cured, just with a different mechanism?
That's a good question. I have one answer that kind of sidebars, which will then kind of lead into it. The one thing that I would change, and I talk about it actually quite often, is this one specific YouTube video from the cooking channel Bon Appetit. It was published maybe 4 or 5 years ago on a segment called It's Alive with Brad Leone, and he was making his own homemade corned beef. And he talked about, and this video has, I think, 3 or 4 million views at this current moment. Is making his own homemade corned beef, but uses blended up celery juice and just puts it in, and it's just celery juice. If, as we know, celery does contain higher amounts of natural nitrate, that's what a lot of the uncured meats use. However, it is in a powdered form that is heavily concentrated with nitrate. He just used celery juice and let it sit for a week or 2. It eventually cured, but I read comments saying that people tried that, using that because he's like, it'll get you the same results. People got sick following this recipe. I looked up articles about it because I've shown classes this specific video because of the misinformation from the video and just like slightly misinformation, it got people sick. And I think that the best way, especially in modern times, to communicate, and I think that this is like something I could change, is having more voices, more science voices, be able to use social media to correct the differences and this widespread communication. I know that there's a lot going on right now. I follow a lot of, not specifically meat science, but food science nutritionists who are helping correct misinformation in the diet field, in MSG, things like that. But I would like to see more people, people our age who've taken Quiz Bowl, who have taken the meat science classes, who know and have this like evidence base to be like, hey, actually, this is what's going on. I would like to change the amount of misinformation about the differences between the two. That is, long story short, that's what I would change.
Very cool. Well, once again, we appreciate your time today. I think that's all the questions that we have for you today. Really appreciated getting to hear your perspective on the whole cured versus uncured conversation. And we are just really thankful that you were able to join us today. So once again, that was Elias Perez, a current master's student here at Iowa State, studying nitrites and meat science. And thank you so much, Elias.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Well,
now we have our next guest. We have Sam Martin. He's a current student in animal science and taken a few meat science courses with Lindsey and I. Welcome, Sam. Thank you so much for being here. To begin our call, would you like to just give us a quick intro on you and kind of your experience with meat science or processed meats?
Yeah, so I've been, definitely not an expert when it comes to processed meats and meat science, but I've taken a few classes here at Iowa State. The 270 introductory course to meat science. That's when I first got exposure to the subject matter. Things that, definitely somebody that, ate a lot of meat in my life, but didn't really know exactly what the processes that went behind it. So that's when I got my first exposure. From there, I actually TA'd that class for a few semesters, and then also had the opportunity to take the 400 level meat science course the spring semester of 25. So took that and was exposed more to the in-depths of different parts of the meat industry, from either what do we put in our processed meat products to how do we label and regulatory, and what is the regulatory effects of those as well. Definitely wouldn't call myself an expert, but I know enough to be dangerous, I think.
Awesome. Well, I like that you mentioned that you've ate a lot of meat in your life and you didn't really understand that whole process behind it. Now you have a little bit more of a background of it. But overall, as a consumer, how do those label claims affect your purchasing decisions? Whether you're going to the store and buying meat or talking to your friends about it, kind of how do those label claims affect what processed meats you're buying, if they do at all?
Yeah, I'm probably not the most conscious consumer ever in the world. For me, price is a big point of tipping, especially I think it's in the position I am now. I'm a college student that you got to make every dollar count. But when I do look at label claims and what it's talking about, like one of the biggest ones is how we label food from a naming aspect. Like for like your hamster with water added or natural juices, because it helps me determine the quality of the product I'm having. What is diluted with added water and stuff like that. And then it also, from a safety asset, from different additives we put into food, controls microorganism activity. And I want to make sure that because I've gotten food poisoning before, and I want to make sure that the food I'm consuming has been treated in an appropriate manner. The biggest thing I think, from a general overview, though, is after going through that class, is it is highly regulated, especially in the U.S., of how we treat our food, because we want a good system. We want a safe and reliable food system that every consumer can count on. So I go in with the peace of mind that when I'm buying these things, these products, these processed meat products, I can trust them because they're being held to the highest standards in the world. I have traveled abroad, so after you've taken a course like that and you can find why we do what we do to process meats, and you go to other countries and they do not follow these regulations, it makes you kind of go like, I don't feel the same trust in my products as I do here in the US.
Sure. Thanks for kind of giving us some insight about what consumers are looking for when it comes to labels. You kind of touched on the safety aspect of it. So we're focusing on uncured versus cured labeling. So does uncured make a difference in what you're purchasing? Like, do you look for uncured products or do you look for cured products, or does it really make a difference versus like what you're looking for on the shelves in the uncured versus cured aspect?
Yeah, I mean, typically it's going to depend on the situation, but I'm probably going to lean more toward the cured side in most situations, whether it comes to, different flavor advantages, to really that safety side of, I know a cured product, like it's going to add another layer of protection against, possible uh, microorganism activity and whatnot. I'm going to typically lean that way. That's just maybe my personal preference. Yeah, I guess that's the way I lean.
Yeah, you kind of hit on this a little bit in your previous answer about kind of trusting like the regulatory and all of that like high level stuff that trickles down in the food system. Apart from that, or like if the government is who you trust, what sources do you go to for information about the food you're eating or food additives in general, whether it's like nitrite or alternatively cured meats that use like the celery powder and stuff? What like sources do you hear or trust about for that?
Yeah, as far as sources I'm going to trust, I'm going to go to anything that's, USDA FDA, like those kind of government regulatory bodies, when I have questions on that, they're the ones making the laws. They're governed by law too. I'm also going to go to the company that's processing them. You know what I mean? It is, they're also regulated to print and give information to the consumer that's accurate, and those are the ones I'm going to trust. I try not to fall into fads or things you see online or trends when it comes to eating, so to speak. I want to make sure the information I'm getting is science-based and definitely going to be something that I can rely on for not just me, but in the future, hopefully my family. I don't know how much my kids will want to eat the food I cook. It could be a lot of chicken nuggets, but I want to make sure whatever they're getting is healthy and nutritious. And if I need to question any of those things, I'm gonna go straight to either the supplier themselves or the governing body that overlooks that question I have.
Of course. Kind of switching gears a little bit. As a consumer, what conflicting things have you heard about nitrites or curing agents in the meat industry? Have you heard any conflicting viewpoints?
I haven't heard a lot. I think the biggest thing I've heard is, you see that like the fad diets, they're putting chemicals in our meat that are changing things. I think you hear that more than anything. I can't say directly I've really had a conversation with anybody at the store about that, and that could be Midwest where we live. It's just a different culture when it revolves around that. But I've definitely like seen bits and pieces about it. For me, there's a reason we've done the science and the research and everything to get to the point where we are and to back it. Like Iowa State alone puts in so much money into research and processed meats. Every year they've made huge breakthroughs in the past. And I think at that point we got to trust that science, that meat science that we've done. Yeah, it's definitely, sometimes a debate. The more and more people wonder where their food comes from and how it was handled, and they're asking questions, which is good, especially as a producer of livestock. Like I want people to be curious about where their food comes from, but also make sure we have a fully listened understanding of, why do we use salt? Why do we add salt to things? I mean, those are all questions I think that are valid to ask, but know that we've learned the hard way sometimes why we got to have some of these products in there for a quality purpose. You gotta build that trust.
Well, thank you, Sam. I think you made some really good points about just the consumer side, especially from the student's perspective. I mean, we're students too. And so getting people that really understand how we see the meat world, but also see it from a consumer perspective and animal science perspective and all of that, I think is really valuable. Thank you again for your time. We've really appreciated our conversation this morning. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks.
As we heard from Dr. Tarte, Elias, and Sam, there are many differing opinions when it comes to the cured versus uncured discussion. We learned that scientifically, uncured products are still cured. We also learned from Elias that some consumers' perceptions are leaning more towards a health-conscious lifestyle, but it's pretty unclear how consumers will react if these labeling guidelines change. From our conversation with Sam, we learned that this topic is pretty challenging and complex for just the average consumer. From all of our three guests, we helped compare our background research to their responses, and what we saw aligned pretty clearly, but there was some definite differences as well. Overall, we are still pretty interested in this topic and would love to explore it more in the future, perhaps in more episodes of the CAP podcast.
Thank you, Lindsay. Well, it looks like we're about out of time today, but we wanted to thank our guests, Dr. Tarte, Elias, and Sam, for talking with us today. As we leave, we want to ask, would you consider changing your entire diet or lifestyle if the labels change? That's it for the Meatheads episode. We are Ashtyn and Lindsey, signing off.
Thank you so much to Ashtyn and Lindsey for the wonderful guests and conversation that they brought to us all today. I hope you learned something about cured and uncured meat, because I certainly did. And with that, we'll close out the episode today, and we'll catch you next time on the Cat Pod.
To email us with any comments, questions, or concerns, please send us an email at contemporary@iastate.edu.